Hey, I'm Rob from JestaThaRogue.com and this is a spoiler-free how to play for My Father's Work. This is a game for 2 to 4 players, plays in about 180 minutes, is designed by T.C. Petty III and is published by Renegade Games. You play a scientist family over 3 generations. Use your local town as well as your ever upgrading estate rooms to gather resources, complete experiments and hopefully complete your masterwork. With the player with the most points over these 3 generations the winner. The game is app and story driven and each scenario has its own components in boxes. Now in this video I'm going to cover the basics of gameplay, but I'm not going to show any story elements, I'm not going to show any hidden components, I'm only going to show the first map from the first scenario to keep it as spoiler free as possible. Before we begin, why don't you perform your own experiment by seeing what happens when you click the subscribe button. Send your servant to click share and also don't forget to leave a comment, but don't be creepy. On to setup. First, open the My Father's Work app. Select the number of players, then create and add the players' names when prompted, and also give the village a name. Then choose a scenario. I'll start with the cost of disease. Get the correct scenario box for the scenario. The app, which is known as a storybook, will now tell you to set up the game for the player count, which we'll do now, starting with the main game board. Fit the pieces together so it looks like this. Make sure the insanity track is on the Gen 1-2 side. The groove in the board fits the rings of the Village Chronicle, so set that in the middle. Shuffle the Gen 1-2 estate tile upgrades into a face down stack on the marked space and put 1 tile face up into each of the 4 empty spots below. Take the red Vanity Estate upgrade tiles and arrange them by type visible to all players text side up. Shuffle the small compulsion cards and the large maladjustment cards and place them near the insanity track. Shuffle the A, B and C experiment deck and place it within reach of all players. Place the generation marker on generation 1 and the round marker on early. For player setup, each player gets an estate board, a player aid, and a storage shed estate tile, marked with an S on the back, which is put in the leftmost upgrade spot on the estate board. Players get a score, insanity and creepy trap marker, 3 journal trap markers, 6 plastic bases and a voting token. The game comes with a selection of minis. Players take 6 and put them in their bases. Now which mini goes in each base doesn't matter, you just need to pick the mini that best represents the role the shape of the base will give them. The circles are servants and the squares are caretakers. Put both servants and 1 caretaker on the lost space on the main game board. Put the spiked circle piece representing your spouse, the other caretaker and the hex mini representing yourself in the quarters in the estate with the voting token. Place markers at the start of their tracks. Frankenstein goes at the start of the creepy track. I'm just going to refer to it as Frankenstein, not Frankenstein's monster. The brain goes at the start of the insanity track and a scoring marker on 0 points of the score track. Journal markers are placed at the start of each journal track of the estate board. Shuffle the masterwork experiments. Each player gets one and is placed face up next to their estate. Return the rest to the box. For the first games, put all the masterworks face up and allow players to pick the one they like the best. Okay, now we're physically set up, we need to go back to the storybook to see how to set up the rest of the game. The storybook will say which space to place the suspicion marker and the flaming torch angry mob marker. Turn the Village Chronicle to the page shown on the storybook and place it back on the board. The storybook assigns a start player. Give them a start player token. And the storybook will show you additional rules for the round, will hint to what's coming in future rounds, and will give you a button to skip to the next round. The storybook will also tell you the story of what's happening right now, so there's context to your actions. On to gameplay, which is played over 3 generations, each of 3 rounds, the early, middle and late years. So you start in generation 1 and the early years round. At the start of each generation, consult the storybook and follow any instructions. Each generation, players draw an A, B and C experiment to form their starting hand of 3 cards. All players activate any start of generation abilities they have. For example, the storage shed lets the player gain 1 resource of their choice. Resources come in 2 types. Ingredients are chemicals shown by bottles, animals, gears and bodies. The other resource type is knowledge, which are blue chemistry, green biology, yellow engineering and black occult cubes. Resources in the supply are unlimited. Players also suffer any penalties from their estate upgrades with cracked tiles. For example, the secret entrance has a Frankenstein icon which moves the player up 1 space on the creepy track. And at the start of each round, again consult the storybook and follow any instructions. Each player draws 1 experiment from the deck of their choice, either A, B or C, then each player gains 3 money from the supply. Now the round and generation setup is complete, we can start the game. Players will take turns placing workers to take the related action, or will pass. Players pick 1 or more people of the same type from their quarters and place them on a location in the town or estate. Players may place pieces of a single type, for example both servants, in 1 location and receive the effect for each piece placed. Pay 1 money to the supply for any pieces already in a town space where pieces are placed, including your own, but never pay more than 1 no matter how many pieces are there. And then you perform that location's effect, but first let's look at each of the characters in detail. The circle servants and the spiked circle spouse, who counts as a servant but may be referred to separately for story purposes, performs actions mainly in town. They can be placed to take actions in the estate, but those spaces with crossed out circles will scare them so much that they get sent to Lost at the end of the round. Pieces in Lost can be recovered with certain actions and story elements. The storybook will reveal all. The square-based caretakers can only perform actions in the estate, but without penalty. The hex-shaped self can also perform actions in the estate without penalty, and when they do perform an action in town, they perform it twice and do not pay 1 money to place with other pieces. However, the ×1 symbol on locations like the church prevents this doubling ability on that space. Okay, let's look at the town actions. We're only looking at the basic town actions here, the rest will be covered by the storybook as needed. Resource gathering spaces allow players to gain the full amount of resources listed on the space. For example, the cemetery gives a body, the park a chemical, the blacksmith a gear, the farmer's market an animal, and the travelling caravan an occult knowledge cube. Some like this one are divided by slashes and players choose which one resource to take. The builder's office lets players build one of the 4 face-up estate upgrades. Pay the cost on the tile and place it on the leftmost empty plot in the estate. If there is a cost on the space to expand the estate, you must be able to pay the cost shown on the space as well. And players can replace an existing estate upgrade tile if they wish, discarding the replaced tile. We mentioned some buildings have a penalty that is paid at the start of each generation, but players also pay the penalty when the building is built. So building the secret entrance would increase the player's position on the creepy track when placed into the estate too. Slide the building tiles down and refill the space from the stack of tiles. A player cannot build more than 1 upgrade with the same name. So that's all the basic buildings. Now, as I mentioned, more advanced buildings will be introduced by the storybook as they come into play, including the hospital on the first map. So let's look at the estate actions. Estate affairs. Draw any 3 experiment cards, keep 1 and discard the rest, or simply gain 1 money. Experiment cards are always discarded face down to the bottom of their respective deck. Perform experiment. This action requires self, 1 caretaker, or 2 servants. Pay the cost in the top left of the experiment. For example, minor necromancy needs 1 body and 1 gear. And the player must also meet certain prerequisites to be able to complete the experiment. A experiments have no prerequisite. B experiments need a player to have completed at least 1 A experiment. C experiments require 2 B experiments to be completed, and D, the masterwork, needs 3 Cs. This of course means to build your masterwork you must have completed 1 A, 2 B and 3 C level experiments. Black occult resources can be used as a wild to replace any type of knowledge, but the player will move 1 space on the insanity track per 1 occult resource used, even if it wasn't used as a wild. Place the experiment next to the estate and gain the bonus at the bottom. For example, minor necromancy moves the player 1 space on the insanity track, gives the player an engineering and occult knowledge cube and 3 points. A experiments always give knowledge. C experiments give points depending on the generation it was built in. For example, the chimpanzee butler is worth 12 points if built in generation 1, 8 in generation 2 and 4 in generation 3. Record knowledge. Pay the cost in matching knowledge cube shown at the top of the journal track and move 1 space. For example, moving forward on this track will currently cost 1 blue chemistry cube. Players can only move forward 1 space on 1 track each action. Then the player may discard cards from their hand and draw that many cards from any deck equal to the new level. For example, after moving on the blue track they can discard 1 experiment and draw 1 card. Each space forward gives 1 knowledge of that type towards the cost of experiments. For example, this sterilisation card can now consider the chemistry requirement paid for as they have moved 1 space on the chemistry track. The second spaces, as well as counting as 2 knowledge of that type for performing experiments, also give permanent bonuses. For example, chemistry lets players move a servant from Lost to the quarters at the start of each round. Biology lets players store 2 extra resources between generations, and engineering gives a permanent B-level experiment. The occult journal track moves a player up on the creepy track and moves the angry mob token 1 space at the start of every generation. On the 3rd level, the red V symbol is to choose and build a vanity estate upgrade. Choose 1 from those available, pay only for the slot in the estate if required, and add it to the estate as normal. These provide ways to score endgame points. For example, the Tesla coils gives you 3 points for each C-level experiment the player has built. Okay, that's all the basic actions. Let's have a look at moving on tracks. When increasing creepy or insanity, move the token 1 space right. When moving the angry mob, move it left. And if you move a track because you've placed pieces on an action space, you only move the track once no matter how many pieces you placed. Arrows on spaces like the church and town hall show that they move their respective tokens back the other way on the track. When moving on the insanity track, gain the penalty shown for each space the token moves forward on that track. If the token is on a space with a spouse or servant icon below, add a character either used, unused or lost to below the track. It is lost at the end of round. For a compulsion card icon, draw 1 and keep it secret. On a future turn, if the condition is met, reveal the card and score it. For example, for this card, a player must visit the church at some point. When they do, discard the card and gain 2 points. And there is a penalty at the end of the generation for not completing these. More on that later. For the discard estate upgrade icon, discard any building upgrade tile from the estate. At the end of the insanity track, and for each movement past it, players lose 3 victory points and gain the penalty on the final space again. The Angry Mob token can never move right onto the same space as the suspicion marker. If the Angry Mob and Creepy token meet, that player is driven out of town. They can no longer take an action in town, except for the church, which is always available. And once the Creepy token is back left of the Angry Mob, a player can take actions in town again. The Storybook token or icon on a location, card, track, or anything else will remind players to tap the related story on the storybook when required. There is a reminder on the turn sequence card to check the storybook before completing any start or end of generation and start of round action steps. This is important as the storybook can have some actions to take or story elements to resolve before people complete these steps. Finally, when it comes to action, if a player has any free actions, they just pay the cost and take the actions in addition to their regular action. If players can't or don't want to take any actions, then they pass and drop out of the round. Once all players have passed, the round will end. Move servants from below the insanity track and from the record knowledge and perform experiment spaces to lost. Collect the rest of the player pieces from town and estate and return them to the quarters. Pass the start player token clockwise. Discard the bottom 2 building upgrades, slide the rest down to refill the row. Then tap on the storybook to move on to the next round to perform any setup or story actions on the app. After 3 rounds, you perform any end of generation steps on the storybook, then you perform the end of generation steps on the turn sequence card. First, choose one experiment in your hand to keep and discard the rest. Select one experiment you completed this generation, slide it under the stored experiments tab next to the journal track and discard all of the other completed experiments from this generation. Make sure you can see the letter of the experiment under the tab. This is now a permanent completed experiment of that type you can use as a prerequisite for future experiments. Players discard any maladjustment cards they had in the previous generation. Then for every 2 compulsion cards a player has now, they gain a maladjustment card face up. These are a penalty that stays for the next generation and are always bad. For example, with the arrogant maladjustment, if the Angry Mob overtakes the Creepy marker this generation, the player loses 5 points. Players then discard any compulsion cards they had. Place the self, spouse and 1 caretaker in the quarters, the rest in lost. Reset all the Creepy and Insanity track markers to 0, players discard any resources and money they had to the supply, and then start the early years of Generation 2. At the end of Generation 2, discard all building upgrades and add the Generation 3 buildings. Also flip the Insanity track over to the Generation 3 side, which automatically gives maladjustment cards towards the end of the track. After the 3rd round of the 3rd generation, the game ends. Tap the storybook to follow any endgame actions and story. Score points as shown on Vanity Estate upgrades, 1 point for each estate upgrade and -3 points per maladjustment. And the player with the most points wins. Ties are broken by a player if one of them has completed their masterwork, and if it's still a tie, the winner will be the player with the most estate upgrades. Tap the storybook to finish and get the ending. Okay, onto some other rules and red tape. Not all components in the scenario box are used every game, only take what is needed. Some of the info in the storybook is secret to a particular player, but they could tell people about it if they wish. Other than that, the storybook should be face up and visible to all players. Players have a voting token, and as you can imagine, at certain points you may have to vote on something. You can use this token to do so. And that's how you play My Father's Work. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when a new video goes live. You can follow me on Twitter, Insta, Twitch and YouTube at Jesta ThaRogue and find the blog at JestaThaRogue.com. I've been Rob aka JestaThaRogue and I'll see you soon.